Hello and welcome to my kitchen. We're going to be making a bean and ham soup, and every good soup has to start off with a really good stock. So we're going to start today by showing you how we make the stock for our household's favorite bean soup. First thing we're going to do is we're going to chop some onion. This is a nice sweet onion. I'm making a big pot of stock because we're going to probably end up jarring and freezing some of it. And this just needs to be a rough chop. So I'm going to take one sweet onion and we're going to give it a handful of just really rough chopping and toss that into a bowl. This is a super hearty soup, goes well really year-round. Obviously you probably wouldn't want to do it during the summer, but it's one of our favorites during the winter. So we have 2 sweet onions. We're also going to add some celery. And for the celery, I just take the whole thing and even the leaves. We're going to, filter out the bones and everything that we don't want in our finished broth. So again, this just needs to be a rough chop. What we're looking for here is the flavor. So we're going to get flavor from the celery and the onions and all of the other goodness that's going to go into this broth. So give that a rough chop and put it into our bowl. And there's not quite enough room in that bowl, so we'll add that there. Also to our broth, we are going to be adding some garlic. We have probably about 2 tablespoons of garlic, diced. We have about a teaspoon and a half of ground black pepper, freshly ground. We have about a teaspoon of kosher salt. It's a lot easier to add salt as we go on rather than to take it away. So we're going to start light with the salt, mostly just to add a little bit of salinity to the water to start extracting the flavors from the onions and the celery. And we have probably 3 or 4 bay leaves. So over in the pot, I have I deboned some bone-in, skin-on chicken thighs, and so those are currently thawing out in the pot. They've been in my freezer. Really with the stock, what you're trying to do is extract all the flavor from the bones, and then you filter out all the stuff that you don't want in the finished product, and it leaves behind some real tasty goodness. So to the pot of water, we're going to add in the sweet onion. We'll add in the celery. This is going to be super good. Garlic, ground pepper, salt, and bay leaves. I'm going to give that a bit of a stir, get all of the goodies down into the water. And we're going to bring this up to a boil, and then once it's been brought up to a boil, we will go ahead and simmer it for really the longer the better. So probably I'll filter it later on this afternoon. We're going to let it get going on the stove. I'll bring you back when it's time to filter it out. You can see how tasty it looks. This is also a soup where you don't have to go to this extra effort to use a homemade stock. You can also use any type of chicken broth, chicken stock that you buy at the store. So that's also another option. We go with the homemade stock because we have the supplies on hand. So I'll be back with you in a little bit to show you how the stock is looking. Okay, it's several hours later, and it smells absolutely incredible in here with our homemade bone broth, chicken bone broth. I'm going to go ahead and take the stock that's been boiling on the stove for several hours, and we're going to strain it in the bowl. bones from bone-in, skin-on chicken thighs that I had removed and frozen a while back as the base for our stock today. It's a great way to stretch your budget since you can typically find bone-in chicken thighs much cheaper than boneless chicken thighs at the grocery store. And it's really simple to remove those bones, stick them in a Ziploc bag, toss them in the freezer, and you have the base for bone broth. So next up, we're going to let it get happy in the refrigerator for a couple of days. Then we'll come back and put together our bean soup. Welcome back to the kitchen. So in our kitchen, in our household, we are entirely gluten-free. I have celiac, which is an autoimmune disease, and it's where the immune system negatively reacts to any ingested gluten. So that's wheat, that's rye, that's barley, or really any derivatives of those. So because of that, we've adapted all of our cooking to be gluten-free. Can get pretty close on most things, and I'm going to share with you bread, an Irish soda bread that's going to go with our bean soup tonight. So we're going to start off with 340 grams of flour. With gluten-free baking, it's really important to measure by weight instead of by volume. And that's actually a pretty good rule of thumb for any baking in general. But especially with gluten-free, just because of the different compositions. So this flour, it's a one-to-one replacement flour that has a mixture of variety of different grains, and then they typically add xanthan gum, which provides the binding power that you typically get with wheat gluten. So we're going to start with 340 grams of flour. I try and get as close as possible without going too far over. To that, we're going to add 40 grams of cornstarch. Yeah, it's pretty close. And another 40 grams of buttermilk powder. What the buttermilk powder is going to do is it's going to provide a little bit of elasticity to the dough, and also a bit of flavor, but primarily looking for those milk proteins to add some elasticity that you typically don't get with a standard gluten-free flour. So into that, we're going to add some baking powder. We're going to add 2 1/4 teaspoons of baking powder. You'll find that most gluten-free baking uses baking powder instead of baking soda. Not quite sure why that is, but we go through a lot of this stuff. And then to that, we're also going to add 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar to this as well. Okay, and then we're going to add a pinch, about 1/2 teaspoon of kosher salt. And we're going to mix that well with a whisk. Now that we have the dry ingredients whisked together and mixed really well, we're going to add some butter. This is about 8 tablespoons of, I typically use salted butter, but you can use unsalted butter. And we are just going to mix that well and integrate it with all of the dried goods. So to this, we're going to add about 1.5 cups of raisins. Okay, and we're going to make a little bit of a well in the center because to this, we're going to crack 1 egg, lightly scramble it, we'll dump that in, and we're going to add 1 cup of buttermilk. I'm also going to add, and this is the first time ever in the Walker household, we have been hearing that adding something as simple as a club soda, a little bit of club soda, or really anything fizzy to a bread recipe will help create a little bit more lift, some more bubbles. So we're going to try that out and see how it works. I've never tried this recipe before. So, this is going to go into a 350 degree oven for about half an hour. Then we'll lower the heat, cook it for another half hour after that, and we should have a nice, steaming, tasty Irish soda bread at the end to go with our bean soup. Now we're going to put the finishing touches on our bean soup. So earlier I showed you how we build a broth. Started with some chicken bones, had some celery, some onions, bay leaves, and a handful of other goodies. You can just as easily make this soup with just plain old chicken stock. So you don't have to go to all the effort of creating your own base. Obviously, the more you do with the soup base, the soup stock, the tastier it'll be. We've done this with everything from chicken stock to ham bone. If you create a ham stock from a ham bone, all of it is super tasty, but this works just as well. I have the broth on the stove right now. It's coming up to a low rolling boil. And to the stock, I'm going to add 1 sweet onion that we'll dice relatively fine, since this is going to be in the final soup. So we want this to be a pretty fine dice. You don't have to use a whole onion. You could use a yellow onion, a red onion, doesn't really matter. We typically use a lot of sweet onion in our household, just because I like the flavor better than a yellow onion. A lot less sulfury than your standard yellow onion. And we'll dice the other half. Again, a fairly fine dice, because this is going to be going into the final soup stock. We'll take this and put it into the stock. Next, we're going to take a few, and kids always give me grief because they say, "Hey, what did you put in this? How did you make it?" And my response is typically a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I do cook from recipes, but if I don't have to, I don't. So in this case, I have, and these are kind of the tender stalks from inside the celery. I have 5 big ones and 1 shorty. So we'll go ahead and chop off the bad part. And again, these will be in the final soup, so we want them to be reasonably the same size or so, and kind of thin, because you don't really want a big chunk of celery showing up in your spoon. And I'm going to go ahead and give these a bit of a dice, just to get some smaller chunks. You know, they're not going to all be the same, but again, the thought is that we'll get a variety of textures here. I'm sure that if someone like Gordon Ramsay was watching this, he would have all kinds of nasty things to say about technique, but you know what? It works for me, and we like the taste. So this is going to go into the soup. Also into the stock, we're going to add about half a teaspoon of celery seed, about a tablespoon of herbs de Provence, adds a really nice lavender flavor to it, and about a quarter cup of apple cider vinegar. I tend to start off light with the apple cider vinegar and then tinker as I go on, so we'll probably add more later. We're going to give this a good stir, get all those ingredients mixed together. And we'll let that simmer for a little while. While that's heating up and getting to a simmer, the other thing that we're going to be adding to the soup tonight is ham. I don't know if, I'm guessing that most of you have been doing what our household has been doing, and ordering a lot of curbside grocery pickup. I've had a hard time finding ham the past few months, but so typically I would just want a heel of ham that I could finely dice. In this case, all they had was sliced ham. So we're going to take the sliced ham, and it ends up being a slightly finer dice than I would like it to be, but that works. You could also do this with a vegetable stock and without the ham if you would like to avoid meat. That is perfectly doable. This might actually be more ham than I need, but we'll see. And I'm just going to put this into the bowl and set it aside. We'll add this once the stock comes to a little bit of a boil, and I will be back with you soon. It smells so good in here. The broth has been simmering for probably about half an hour or 45 minutes to get some really great flavor from the celery and the onion infused into the broth, along with the herbs that we added. I'm going to go ahead and add part of the ham, probably not all of it, and beans. So this is a soup where, again, put as much effort into it as you'd like. A lot of times we do this with canned beans, but you can also do this with dried beans. Soak them overnight. It takes a little bit longer to simmer them in the broth, or toss them into the Instant Pot and pressure cook them for a bit. I'm using canned beans today. This is a mixture of kidney beans, cannellini beans, and Great Northern beans. This is 4 cans of beans going into the broth, and we're also going to add some of the ham. So I started with about half the ham. Also to that, and this is a secret weapon, I'm going to add molasses. I have about half a cup here. I'm only going to use about a quarter of a cup at a time because, again, like the apple cider vinegar, it's a lot easier to add more than to take it away. So we're going to start a little light. Probably you'll get close to adding the whole half cup, and that's going to add a real great flavor that really makes this soup what it is. You can see that color really darkening as I stir this in. This is smelling so good. I wish I could share it with all of you. We're going to let it cook for a little bit to heat up the beans, get a little bit of the flavor of the ham into the broth, and then we'll be back to serve it up with our Irish soda bread, which came out of the oven and is just cooling. We'll show that in just a few moments. While we wait for the soup to cook, I'd like to tell you about the organization I'm highlighting this week, the Bellevue Human Services Division. This group is housed in Bellevue Parks and Community Services and takes on 3 roles in the community. They help plan the city's human services response by conducting a biennial human services needs update to really gauge the level of need within the community and specific service needs. They facilitate the city's human services response by convening and engaging agencies and partners all throughout the community in problem solving. How are we going to solve some of these major human services issues? And probably the most visible piece, the group funds human services needs through dispersal of both federal and city general fund dollars to a network of service providers that respond to community needs. Typically, this is handled through a biennial funding process. So human services agencies submit requests for funding, which are reviewed and prioritized by the Human Services Commission. Those are sent to the City Council, and the City Council approves budget allocations. This year, as you can probably imagine, human services providers were met with really unprecedented need for services. Funding for basic survival, support in times of personal and family crisis, and help accessing important services became vital to more of our neighbors than ever before. The pandemic put many people who had previously never needed human services assistance and resources into a position where they now needed assistance finding food and paying rent, paying their mortgage, and accessing unemployment benefits. Bellevue's budget has over $4 million allocated each year toward human services needs. In 2020 and 2021, the Human Services Work Group has been responsible for distributing an additional $1.25 million that was received from the federal government through the CARES Act. Throughout the pandemic, service providers have seen a significant increase in domestic violence-related issues, the need for mental health services, and more people within our community experiencing housing instability. In its role as a funder, Bellevue Human Services provides funding to help keep the lights on for programs running in organizations like CMAR, Sound Mental Health, LifeWire, HopeLink, and Youth Eastside Services. In the most recent funding application round, 102 Human Services Fund applications were received from agencies in the community, totaling over $7 million. That exceeds the available budget by right around $3 million. So the need is greater than funding available. This need it's real. It's in the community right now. One organization that is supported by both Bellevue Human Services and Cross of Christ is Congregations for the Homeless. The number of our neighbors who are either unhoused or residentially unstable are now larger in number than before the pandemic. Organizations like Congregations for the Homeless help those experiencing homelessness with shelter and connection with social services. The Human Services Fund provides approximately $1.5 million to Congregations for the Homeless each year, including $67,000 toward the rotating shelter, which typically comes through our building every May. The need for human services within our community is real, and I'd like to thank all of you who support the myriad social services programs, including Congregations for the Homeless, that our church has had a long-standing partnership with. Thank you for really providing support and helping people at some of their most vulnerable times, helping lift them up and provide them with access to the services that they need so that they can move beyond the current crisis that they're in. This soda bread smells so good. I may have taken a little bit of a corner off of it and tasted it, and very tasty. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and slice this, and I probably didn't leave it cooling long enough since I have kids who are kind of hungry. They smell this, they smell the soup, they are hovering and waiting for dinner. So we're going to go ahead and slice this, and people will take a chunk. So let's just take a chunk like this. That with a little bit of butter on it will be absolutely delightful. So we have our soda bread. Get a nice scoop of the soup. Again, I wish you could smell this. It smells absolutely amazing. Let's see how we did. thank you for joining me in my kitchen this evening as I prepared my family's favorite bean soup. I hope you enjoy, and the recipe will be online at crossofchristbellevue.org. Go ahead and click on the comfort food link. You'll find the recipe for all of the comfort food videos there. Have a great evening.